So the Planning and Capital Programs Committee meeting from the previous month. Can I have a motion and a second, please? I see moved by Dirt, second by Mr. Frederickson. Would call the question. Can we vote, please? All right, the motion passes. The next item on the agenda, and we have a very lengthy agenda today, is a briefing on the capital programs report for FY22 by Kerry Roca, Assistant GM for our Capital Programs Management Office. Kerry?
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Pond, and to the board for this opportunity to talk about our quarterly briefing for quarter 3. So this is from June through March of this year. Next slide. I'm going to review a few pieces here for you, the capital budget components, what the status of our state of good repair program is, give you an update on More Marta Atlanta and More Marta Clayton. We'll talk about the top 10 projects by expenditure, and then we'll give you an update on our quick delivery projects that I know you've heard about before. Next slide. So this is the general overview of the budget for this year. Our state of good repair budget had $481 million. We have expended to date $165.5 million, which is 34.4% of the budget. More Marta, Atlanta, and Clayton had been budgeted at $110 million. Something to note here, those were more like ceilings for those programs as they had planned out the program. The FY23 budget that you'll be looking at does have more specific per project and a much more realistic budget in terms of how we're going to measure it. Next slide. This is for the state of good repair portion of the budget, budget versus expenditures by the asset categories, and the 5 asset categories that FTA requires us to carry. And the blue lines are the budget, and the orange line is the expenditures to date. Next slide. This is the overall More Marta Atlanta spend for the capital side. As you see, most of the projects have been spending in planning. We do have one project that's been spending in design, that's Summerhill. And then there's some programmatic charges that are towards the bottom. This year we've spent $11.6 million for FY22 and a total spend of $36.5 million for More Marta Atlanta. This covers More Marta Clayton. Again, most of the spending here has been in planning and then some programmatic spends. We've spent $2.5 million for FY22 and a total spend of $7.7 million. And it should be noted, the Clayton O&M facility, and we added this note here, the real estate costs and facility costs are split, so you may look at this and it may seem a little bit off, but this is just the More Marta Clayton portion. Here are the top 10 projects by expenditure, so the top expenditures that we've had through the end of March. And I'm going to step through each of these here, but they're all listed here on one slide. So the new rail car purchase, and I'm just going to hit some of the highlights. Obviously, I don't want to spend a lot of time here because there's a lot of detail that goes behind these projects, but what we've achieved for this fiscal year. So the preliminary design is complete for the rail cars. The intermediate design is underway. And they have been working on the CQ400 interior and exterior branding. Next slide. This is a life extension project for CQ310 and 311, and 94 of the 114 cars that are rehabbed have been returned to Marta. Next slide. On our TR4 project, there's been some great progress in the field there. We've replaced the Northland DXO in the Georgia 400 corridor recently, and we've completed changeout of concrete ties in the Avondale Yard and around 65% in South Yard, including 14,000 feet of running rail that's been replaced. The team right now is preparing for the Buckhead DXO replacement for February. slide. On the tunnel ventilation side, we have finished the tunnel segment between Arts Center and Civic Center. Those were constructed, tested, and safety certified. We've also completed waterproofing and mitigation for the various electrical components to prevent future corrosion. And I'm going to talk about the electric feeder cable in the fast track projects towards the end of this presentation. Next slide. On the TCSU project, we have completed the field unit implementations and are working to decommission the old system. There's a 90-day ADT test that's required, so we're pending that software validation to move forward with that test. Next slide. I know you've heard about the CPMO and the work that the team has been putting in there, but really enhancing our project controls for all of our projects, improving our reporting and status updates, looking at really focusing on the policies and procedures and resolving all of the audit that I know Emil talked about in earlier committee meeting. On the project management side, we've been providing project managers, planning, engineering, and capital delivery, and working through some technology improvements, really launching our unifier system as well as the online invoicing system. Next slide. For escalators, this is progress actually overall. So 46 of the 116 units have been rehabilitated and put back into service. This project is very successful. They're running nearly a year ahead of schedule, and it's in its 6th year. Next slide. Station rehab, there's a lot of work going on in a whole host of different locations. College Park, Airport, 5 Points. 5 Points, just to be clear, that's the platform level rehabilitation components. There's been replacement of bus loop at North Avenue, as well as HE Homes. So you can see that a variety of work is being done, mostly in early work packages to really tackle things that are either safety issues or things that are absolutely necessary up front, and then further designs are progressing. Next slide. And these stations, we have further design for those packages at these 4 stations. In terms of the environmental health and safety project, this project really provides support to all of the projects that we have ongoing, maintaining our environmental permits, maintaining the environmental management system that's required. They did receive this year a no further action on Georgia Avenue remediation site, and they've completed confined space assessments for rail stations, maintenance stations. On the elevator side, these 2 elevators and escalators are actually packaged together, but they're separate projects within our capital program. 71 of the 111 units have been installed, have been rehabilitated, so 64% complete, and it is, as I stated, this project together with the escalators is running ahead of schedule. Next slide. So I'll give you an update on the quick delivery projects that were presented to you a few months ago back in February. And these are for the tunnel ventilation system, South Yard roof replacement, the parking lot pavement program, as well as smart restrooms. The tunnel ventilation feeder cable was an addition to this project, but it was a great opportunity for us to do some repair work for something that was needed while we were doing the tunnel ventilation work. So we replaced 3,100 linear feet of feeder cables powering the Midtown tunnel fans located between Arts Center and Midtown. And this work was completed on schedule as planned. Next slide. With regard to the South Yard roof replacement, we have had a hang-up. The original material that we wanted to use had supply chain issues with a 1-year delivery on the material. So the team has been working together to come up with a new material for that work, and they're currently working on negotiating a guaranteed maximum price. And the Smart Restroom Program, we have moved forward with 4 stations here, East Point, Doraville, HE Homes, and Dome. And you see the actual start dates for some of those and planned start dates that we have. We have also moved forward with the material procurement, and I know we came to the board for that approval for purchase of all the equipment that we needed to make sure we were overcoming any supply chain issues that we might have had. So that requisition is being finalized, and we hope to complete that purchase very soon. Next slide. With regard to parking lot paving, we have 12 stations that are programmed for this, and you can see them listed here. A lot of boring work and the soil work has happened. Next slide will give us a little more detail. So all the geotechnical work for the parking lots is complete. We've received 6 of the 12 proposals for the component guaranteed maximum price, and we expect more next week. We are using a new process called full depth reclamation. This is the first use we've had at Marta. It is something that's been used across the country, but it's a way of really reclaiming the material in place, basically solidifying that material and then not having to dispose of it. So it's really cost effective, very sustainable, and it was recommended in these particular applications by both the designer and the geotechnical consultant. With regard to drainage, all the parking lots are getting reviews of their grading. We're doing camera inspections of all the drainage lines. We're removing and replacing anything that's damaged, and we're restoring 4 of the detention ponds at some of the locations that really need to be cleaned. Finally, we're looking at ADA access, making sure that every station lot is fully compliant with the number of spaces and that ramps are properly accessible from those spaces to get into the stations. Next slide. And that's my presentation.
Thank you, Kerry. Are there any questions for Ms. Roca? Yes, Rod.
Thank you. Looks like you had a very busy year, and you got a lot done with some challenging supply chain issues. A question about the CPMO. Those were all focused on internal controls and tightening up what we've done in the past to make sure we are on schedule and on budget, and making sure that we're being more efficient in our information systems. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a very fundamental component of what the CPMO does.
And we're about 68% complete with that process. We have some more to go in the next fiscal year to kind of make sure we have a tight control over that operation.
I would characterize what we're doing with the CPMO as we're really just getting started. We have been doing a lot of work to stand it up, and next year we're really going to be focused on the fundamentals like project controls, as well as supporting our project managers who are the ones delivering the projects.
And when I joined the board earlier this year, and I believe in the PM office, I mean, it's a very efficient way to do capital projects. We talked about, we had a funding level that we wanted to increase. I want to say, if I can remember, we were down by about 30 to almost 32 people. Is that, have we made any headway on that number, that account?
Yes, we are working to bring in consultants through the JRMT contract to support the CPMO as well as project managers. And that's part of what they do is seconded staff or extension of staff. And so we are actively doing that and making placements.
So where do we stand on that? Have we put a dent in that number?
I've asked Kerry to answer that.
So going into this year, we had roughly 55 folks that were full-time dedicated to the CPMO. We do need to ramp up in order for all this work. We were looking at about 30 to 35 additional folks. To date, I think since we had come to the board, I know there's at least 10 hires that have been made. So, and as well as additional hires on the Marta side, right? So we really need the CPMO, which is an integrated organization, to be staffed on both sides for success. And we've done a good amount of hiring as well for PMs, especially on that side. We've added at least 3 new cost engineers or budget analysts to our team. within the last couple of weeks as well. So we'll certainly see more improvement, more speedy reporting, and being able to really support our project managers better is really the purpose, right? We have to help our project managers understand where their projects are.
Okay, so we're making, we cut that by a third, sounds like, since we authorized. That's a good number, especially in this environment. I have a couple more questions. 5 Points is my station for where so when will that work be done? Because I want to go right up the escalators and everything like that.
I'm going to have to go back and check on that. Unfortunately, with 130 projects, I can't know all the dates off the top of my head.
I have a personal interest in the 5 Point station.
We'll certainly get that for you.
And I do too, Director. I pass through there twice a day now as my connecting station. So the work is beginning this summer on the platform level for the rehabilitation work.
And then I have one question for the general manager. We are facing supply chain snarls all over the world, but in particular in the construction industry. At South Yard, in particular with the roofing material, there's been a shortage, and the designers are having to respec in. Are we doing anything from our purchasing perspective to recognize that there are these issues, and are we putting more time on our lead time by, is there anything we can do to make this more flexible in the supply chain area?
Yeah, so from a planning perspective, we're taking into account what the current conditions are. We're also investigating more innovative methods for getting the work done when you're talking about, roof repair, whether it's fill or welding. Just trying to figure out where the shortfalls are and if we can mitigate by using another method. But this, again, this is iterative. We're taking it into account when we plan, and then as we execute on the work, we're taking steps to be as creative as we can be.
Anything else, Rod? Jim, I think you were next. Mr. Durrett?
Yeah, thank you. Manjeet, this is probably for you. So I'm going to go back to early in this presentation when we see that we're about 30% of budget spend for a program, and we're 75% through the year when we're getting this information. What are we doing at a high level to make sure next year, when we are 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year, the number is not 30%, it's closer to 75%?
Well, thanks for asking that question, Director Durrett. So there's a couple of things going on, and so for why we have the underspend that we have for fiscal year 22, it wasn't well matched with scope and schedule for the projects. For fiscal year 23, the budget that's coming before the board, before the committee today, and ultimately to the board for adoption, does reflect a real close examination of matching the budget asks with the scopes and schedules for the project. So we have much more confidence in the fiscal year 23 budget that's coming before you. Additionally, there hasn't been enough labor to execute the projects. And so a moment ago, we talked about how we're addressing that as a mix of consultant surging of resources, as well as hiring and promoting internally those who are ready to stretch into new roles. The organization wasn't quite ready to undertake this massive shift in what it had been doing for decades into suddenly this large state of good repair and expansion program. I think just before I started here at Marta, the phrase used was the tsunami of work coming. So that is indeed something that we needed to catch up, to ramp up, to address. Some of the things that we're doing to improve are to build up the administrative infrastructure, particularly project controls, through the centralized program management office, and really this next fiscal year focusing on fundamentals for a large capital program. And I mentioned that the labor is an area of focus. We have project managers who are working on 8 complex projects when they should be working on 1 of them. And that was a surprise when I came here. So that is in the process of changing. Transparency and candor is part of what the board and the public and our partners should expect from us too. So you're going to see more reporting coming out of the capital program and expansion and innovation division, and candor like you're getting from us now. As if we're not candid, issues will fester and they will just get worse. So we will continue to be transparent about the program, and also there'll be plenty of good news to share as we're sharing progress here a moment ago about our projects. And finally, I think too, we do need to calibrate the capital program. The board took step to support that recently, which was the approval of the HDR contract to do financial capacity modeling, so we can do planning and scenarios for what is our financial capacity, even assuming a reasonable amount of federal grants for, particularly for expansion programs. And so understanding that will help us calibrate the program as we look long-term, as we have pretty good confidence for this next fiscal year, but we need to develop more data so we can have more confidence in what we have for moving forward, and the board can make informed policy decisions about setting priorities.
I really appreciate your answers to my question. And I promise you guys, I didn't set him up.
Jim?
Thank you.
Jim, in the pre-brief, I told him that question was going to come, and I had you in mind. Mr. Bryson, I think you had something.
I think Majid answered my questions for me. I really understand what the challenges you're facing, and your collaboration with your team through the CMAR and everyone else is making it possible. And once again, it's a shift that you had to make that was long overdue, and I see some progress in moving forward. And once again, you addressed it in a very clear way to me, and that's what we want to see. We want to see it happen, and we appreciate that. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Director.
Just,
my
I'm
light
sorry.
has been on before
Sorry,
anyone else.
did not see you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know
Chairwoman
it's-
Scott.
I know it's difficult to see up there. I just
right.
didn't want you to close it out without being able to ask this question. Good morning.
Good morning.
On yesterday, we had quite listening to the City of Atlanta briefing. There were several questions regarding restrooms. And as a result, I have been asked questions as well regarding restrooms and access. Did we actually start on 523, the Mercedes-Benz restroom, smart restroom? It says plan to start on 523?
Yes,
So we did.
yes.
Great. How many did we use a method to prioritize which restrooms would be worked on first?
Yes, we did.
You have no idea how this played out yesterday. It was very, very important. So I want to make sure that we are addressing this issue.
Yeah, we did a prioritization when the program started, and we distributed them throughout the different districts and jurisdictions, as well as the condition assessments that kind of dictated that. So it was a combination of the two.
So will all the restrooms eventually be smart restrooms?
Yes, ma'am. That's the program that one of the innovatives where we've asked to be able to purchase all of the equipment at a single time.
Right.
That we ask so that we can have those in our stockpile and get away from the need for material restrictions. So yes, the 64 have been ordered, or are in the process of being ordered. So we've fast-tracked the first 4 to make sure those are going, so that we start getting material, we can increase that to meet the supply.
So do we, looking at the start date, do we know how long it will take? Like, if we know to start at 523, is there a end time or a finish date?
It depends on the location because of access and what the condition of the existing location is, but usually they take 6 to 8 months.
6 to 8 months. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else?
Yes, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not sure who I need to address this to, but a few years back, when the smart restrooms first got on the radar, Mr. Krisak and I had a lengthy conversation during the committee meeting about the College Park restrooms, and it was my understanding that they were going to be moved up in the priority, but I don't see that here. because they were saying that College Park is one of the busiest stations we have, and it's not in the priority.
Thank you. I'm not sure, I don't recall a commitment to change a priority, but my question would be, where is College Park in the priority? If we can identify that at least, and then have a conversation about why it's where it is, and if there's an opportunity to express it, we'll take a look at that.
That information is available, we'll put that together for you.
Thank you.
Anything else, Roberta? Just in closing, if you reflect back on particularly that first slide, I think transparency is why we have this CPMO program, and these projects can slide and slide for years before you know it. So the reality is that we've already seen, we're pointing out issues that need to be addressed, and you don't turn something around in 2 days. You have to plan years in advance. So I think that's the real benefit of this program, and it's a great program when it's run well. So thank you. I have one last question, and we talked about this earlier with Manjeet, but as we go forward in the quarters, we will take these larger projects where we have construction funded and then show that on a clear bar chart showing the schedule
Yes. Yeah,
and where we are versus the original schedule.
Yes, and we recently did a scrubbing and an update to our master program schedule. So we do have, all of our projects are now in a master program schedule, and we will be reporting more routinely on what the expected dates are, the baseline date, and then where we are to date. So
Okay.
you can actually see in comparison what the plan was and where we are.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Are there any other matters to come before this committee? If not, we'll close the meeting. Thank you.
To order,
The first item on the agenda is the approval of the April 28, 2002 meeting minutes. They're in your packet. If there's no discussion or edits, I will entertain a motion for approval of those. It has been moved and seconded. Please vote. The minutes are approved. Agenda item number 2 is a resolution authorizing a modification in contractual authorization for preventative maintenance and repair services for bus fire suppression and gas detection systems, IFB B41132A. Mr. Morrow, welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Worthy, Vice Chair Abdul Salam, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. McKinney, and members of the Operations Safety Committee. I am Anthony Morrow, General Superintendent of Bus Maintenance, and may I direct your attention to a resolution authorizing for the modification of contractual authorization for preventive maintenance and repair of fire suppression and gas detection systems. Next slide, please. What is fire suppression and a gas detection system on a bus? A fire suppression and a gas detection system on a bus is a 6-zone system that monitors for gas leaks on the bus, on the roof, the cabin compartment, and also the engine compartment. It also has a fire suppression that will be actuated in the engine compartment in case there's a thermal event. You know, the main reason for this is try to prevent, you know, any injuries or total loss of the bus. Next slide, please. The contract history. This contract began in November of 2018. Cintas Fire Protection is our current vendor. They are a Fortune 500 company with over 40,000 employees. The original contract value was $1,961,269. It was a 3-year base with a 1-year option for a total of 4 years. Next slide, please. Why am I here? The reason for the modification. Well, the replacement contract they did not include CNG tank inspections, which was a separate contract, and we still saw that, okay, if we combine these 2 contracts, there could be some cost savings. Right now, we're paying $150 just for the CNG tank inspections, but we figured out that if we put these 2 together, we can get that cost down to $50. Also, the old contract did not have advanced systems that's on our new electric buses and on our new Gillick buses. For example, we have on our new Gillick buses that if a thermal event or gas leak is detected, the bus will come to a stop and automatically open the rear doors so the passengers can, you know, evacuate the bus more safely. So with that, you know, those 2 items was not on the original contract, so we had to go back and do a negotiation with our current vendor to inspect our electric buses and also these new advanced systems on our buses. That increased our spending from $31,000 a month to $40,000 a month. So therefore, we were spending the money a little bit faster than what we had originally estimated. Next slide, please. So all of that happens that we need about 10% more of the contract value to make sure all the invoices are paid and then get to the end until the new contract is in place. I'm happy to announce that the new contract is currently advertised and that should be, you know, awarded very quickly. So therefore, I'm asking the general manager or the authority delegate for a total of $200,000 so we can make sure the business is done until the new contract is in place. Is there any questions, please?
Thank you, Mr. Morrow. Any questions from the committee? Ms. Abdul Salam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As it relates to fire suppression, last month over on Garden Walk, we had a bus that caught fire. So how would that be practically used in a situation like that where a bus catches fire?
Well, I'm not particularly, I don't know the particulars of what happened with that bus, but I do know that if a bus catches fire, we like to use the word thermal event because we don't like fires. If there's a thermal event, then the system will catch it, and also it'll automatically deploy the retardant agent. The operator also has a manual override that they can deploy the retardant agent if they deem fit. Does that kind of answer your question?
It answers the question, but I didn't see that. I didn't see that was how that happened.
Okay.
The driver was able to pull over and stop the bus and get people off the bus, but I didn't see where anything else happened.
Let me see. Mr. Chaffin, do you know more about that incident?
Yes, ma'am. That event actually was caused due to a brake issue. So the fire suppression does not have a sensor on that
On the
end.
break, okay.
But what the fire suppression does do, it allows it not to spread from there into the engine compartment. So it will activate. Now, we had one about a year ago that was very small and minor, and it kept it to a section of about 1 foot. So that's how great the system works. It kept that small section to 1 foot, and the bus was relatively fixed easily. So the system on these buses is detrimental, is something that we need, especially with CNG, because it is a higher burn rate. CNGs run hotter. So it's a very good system that we need to make sure we don't have any lapse in between now and August when the new contract comes out.
All right,
And I hope
understood.
that answered your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? All right, I'll call the question. Oh, yeah, probably need a motion first. Moved by Mr. Durrett, seconded. Go ahead and vote. That resolution passes. Thank you, Mr. Morrow.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 3 is a resolution authorizing the solicitation of proposals for the procurement of paratransit vehicles, RFP P50182. Mr. Turpin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Chairman Worthy, Vice Chair Abdul Salam, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. McKinney, and members of the Operations and Safety Committee. My name is Miles Turpin, the Director of Mobility. Additionally, I'd like to recognize my peer in the back, Mr. Jonathan Weaver, who's been very integral and pivotal in this, what I'm about to present to you, along with the Marta maintenance team. So I would like to bring your attention to agenda item number 3, solicitation for procurement of paratransit vehicles, mobility bus contract 50182. Next slide. So a little background on this is that, as we all know, the mobility vehicles have some intricate parts, some complex components that we've started back in 2017 with the initial procurement. And so this falls into alignment with our fleet management plan and our vehicle sustainability for our paratransit and our disability community folks. So as you can see from the slide, the current fleet of 2018s and 2019s, and just as important, and where I look at that last bullet point for you, the replacement plan list, retirement at 5 years, 150,000 miles is in recommendation from the FTA. Next slide. What is a flexible contract? Marta can pick and choose, right? Buses that we defer, we need change for, and just as important, that allows for procurement of different bus configurations. As we know, as we go through the years and with manufacturers and providers, different bus styles that we have the ability to seek or understand better, particularly with propulsion systems, that's going to be an advantage for us. And all buses manufactured to MARTA specifications and contract requirements is very important to us. Next slide. MARTA will use this contract, right, to determine service level agreements for our upcoming year. And then again, MARTA service plan requests bus size and quantity required for the upcoming year. And you'll see a slide later with that, what I mean by that. Board of Directors is advised of annual procurement of buses including quantity and propulsion type. As we all know, we're trending in the EV area for electric buses, as we already got on the fixed route. And so we're exploring those types as well. And then the Department of Contracts and Procurement Specialists requests pricing and places orders for the upcoming year as well. Next slide. RFP term is 5 years with one 5-year option. Anticipated annual cost is $6,480,000 plus PPI each year. And anticipated vehicle procurement is 48, which is 20% of our current fleet, which is the industry standard. RFP includes procurement, delivery, and training at all mobility bus facilities. Therefore, the Office of Mobility respectfully requests this body to authorize for a resolution to solicit proposals for mobility bus flexible procurement with 5 years base and a 5-year option. Next slide. Thank you, and I return it to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Turpin. Quick question from me. Will this procurement go through DOAS as well, like the previous one, or is this?
No, this is gonna go through FTA.
Okay.
So, we went through DOAS before, just on a minor technicality years back, but yeah.
Gotcha. Any other questions from the committee? Mr. Snyder?
Thank you, Mr. Worthy. I just got a quick sort of logistic question for you. You mentioned that the, I guess, replacement planned retirement for the vehicles is 5 years or 150,000 miles. So, one, what is the average sort of annual mileage for these vehicles that you're seeing? And two, I think we've got 2018 and 2019 models right now. So they're reaching their, I guess, life cycle. So are we planning to replace all of those vehicles? So just kind of give me a sense of that.
Yes, so remember from the FTA, it's a recommendation. We can go past that 5 or 150,000 mile recommendation, but in order to keep the fleet standards for the mobility side, unlike fixed route, remember, fixed route is on a fixed route. Mobility goes into the neighborhoods and, different streets and things, so the wear and tear is a lot more, just extremely different from the fixed route side. The average mileage we're dealing with right now probably falls in there between 50,000 miles with our MBBFs. But what we're trying to do is remember, right now there's about a 15 to 18th month hold on chassis, not only for mobility but for fixed route as well. So we want to get ahead of the curve. It's my fiscal responsibility to make sure that when we have on the slide you saw 48 vehicles or 20% of those vehicles, that should give us a good plan so that when the total life cycle and the fleet manager plan ends, we'll have an influx of vehicles coming in year after year. If that answers your question.
Right. I understand. Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? See no more lights. All right, I'll entertain a motion on agenda item number 3. Been moved by Mr. Pond and seconded. Please vote. That resolution passes. Thank you, Mr. Turpin.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 4 is a resolution authorizing the award of contracts for the procurement of targeted cleaning services, IFB B47530. Mr. Thomas.
All right. Good morning, Chairman Worthy, Vice Chair Ms. Abdul Salam, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. McKinney, and esteemed Operations and Safety Committee members. My name is Sean Thomas. I'm the Director of Facilities, and if I may, I'd like to bring your attention to agenda item number 4. And this is a resolution authorizing the award of IFB 47530, and this is for targeted cleaning services at Marta stations. Next slide, please. So some of the key topics that I'll discuss with you today will basically be an overview of the objective that this solicitation supports with regards to the strategic objectives of the authority, a brief high-level overview of the program and how it came to be, as well as an overview of the scope of work to be followed by the award analysis and the recommendations, for this committee. Next slide, please. So this solicitation supports the achievement of 2 of the authority's key strategic objectives. First and foremost, improving the customer experience, as well as promoting the authority's image and brand out in the system. Next slide. So for some background, in 2020, at the start of the pandemic, the authority made a commitment to APTA's health and safety program. And this program focused on helping us to prepare our system for patrons returning to public transit. Following those recommendations, we went towards increasing the comfort level of riders, and it led to us implementing this targeted cleaning program. And the intent of this solicitation is for us to continue with that commitment through increased cleaning and sanitizing efforts at our stations. Next slide. So as a general overview of the program, we kind of had it broken down into 3 different tiers of some of the different levels of cleaning services and it kind of shows, the intent here is to try to show where this targeted cleaning program fits into some of the existing programs as well. So tier 1 basically just kind of gives the daily cleaning provided by Marta employees at our stations, right? And this is just some of the routine daily tasks to kind of help us with keeping the stations clean and delittered. Tier 2, where the targeted cleaning program fits, is for monthly tasks at each station and just on a different frequency level, of course, different level of intensity as far as the cleaning goes. And tier 3 follows along that same progression with less frequent, more intense type cleaning services. And for example, some of those tier 3 tasks would be more on a annual or greater schedule. And it could include sealing or exterior pressure washing, kind of like you see in the picture to the far right. Next slide. So to ensure equitable and consistent coverage, we followed the framework that was established during our station zone program. And here we kind of divided the system up into these various zones that you see to the far left. And of course, one of the things that we actually gave additional consideration to is the area within the red circle. And with those stations being considered part of the inner trunk of the system, and most of which are right in the middle of town or in close proximity to some of the venues that we have a lot of patrons travel to and from, or visitors from other cities or states that come to town to go to a ball game or a parade or what have you. So we basically wanted to make sure that we gave some additional consideration given the additional foot traffic at some of those locations. And I think it also is worth mentioning that this, within this framework, we're talking about approximately 6.2 million square feet of space. So, next slide. So with regards to the scope of work, we're looking for industrial type cleaning and pressure washing, sanitizing of high touch point surfaces, deep cleaning of restrooms, as well as some additional support with the removal of graffiti and other vandalism that may occur in our stations. Next slide. So with regards to the contract itself, during our responsibility determination, we identified 9 vendors that we are seeking to award to. And as you'll note on here, 6 of these vendors are certified DBEs. So that kind of gives us increase of the actual participation above and beyond the established DBE goal. Next slide, please. So the award analysis, contract IFB 47530 was established as with a term of 3 base years and 2 option years. The goal was originally established as 10%, but as I mentioned in the previous slide, we're seeking to award to 6 certified DBE vendors out of the 9. So that kind of puts our participation at closer to 70%. So the award amount that we see listed here of $36,790,256.62 is collectively will be distributed among these nine vendors that we see to the right here, and each one of the vendors, as I mentioned earlier, that are certified DBEs are identified here. So with this in mind, I respectfully request authorization to award IFD 47530 to multiple firms for targeted cleaning services at Marta stations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Any questions from the committee members? Mr. Mullis?
First of all, thank you for jumping on this very quickly and getting these folks in here. Is Ms. Nash here?
No, Ms. Nash is not here today.
She's not here today. I'm just very pleased that we have such high DBE participation. But I have a question. How did we come to a goal of 10%?
The 10% goal was established based on the methodology that we used using the county business patterns. That goal was established by Ms. Nash as a result of reviewing the recommended goal from the county business pattern methodology.
Okay.
You want to add anything?
Yeah. Well, thank you. First of all, maybe just introduce yourself for the board members.
Yes, my name is Shalandra Cornick, and I'm the acting manager for supplier diversity. I'm here in Ms. Nash's place because of a family emergency.
Thank you, Shalandra. We appreciate you being here. And Mr. Mullis, I do recall, having conversations like this with Ms. Nash, and she will remind me that, our goals are established in connection with federal guidelines, and while that is a quantitative set of parameters, Marta strives on a qualitative basis to surpass all of those, and I appreciate, Sean saying that while the goal is 10, that's not what holds us. We're shooting for 70 or above. So.
And I may add that even though we had 3 vendors who are not DBE, they did provide the 10% DBE participation, each of them. So basically, we have more than 70% DBE participation.
Mr. Pond or Mr. Durrett? Mr. Pond.
Question, contractually, cleaning is objective. I'm just curious, when you go behind these vendors and you see what they've done, that's a pretty objective criteria sometimes. So I'm not sure there's a real answer here. I know if it looks clean to you, it may not look clean to someone else. So I'm just asking that question, how you control that.
Yes, sir. So fortunately for us, over the past 2 years, but basically for the entirety of the pandemic thus far, that's something that we've had a different set of eyes looking at, and there's been some lessons learned as far as some areas of improvement, and also one of the things that's different from what we've been doing since that time and what we're trying to do now is essentially we kind of recognize that the previous schedule of trying to perform some of this stuff just wasn't enough. So we've kind of shortened the window and try to make sure that this is something that that's done every 30 days on a consistent basis, and we have as part of the and I kind of mentioned this earlier, but I didn't get into a lot of details about some of our efforts with regards to the station zone management and even as far as there's some efforts to adopt the stations to try to get a different set of eyes, and this kind of helps us put the resources in there to actually do something about it other than look. And so I think it's important to say that. So, yeah, we definitely understand it could be subjective in a lot of ways, but I think that this in addition to the station management concept, in addition to some of the adopted station stuff that we're working on, it kind of puts some action behind the efforts.
Yeah, Ms. Hartage?
Thank you, Chairman Worthy. Thank you for the presentation, and believe me, working in healthcare, I understand every day what you're up against. So thank you. This is a difficult area to try to manage. But on your vendor list that you had there, how many of those vendors have you worked with in the past, and how many are new?
So that's a great question, Ms. Hartage. So I think from what I recall, it's only 2 vendors on this list that we've not worked with before. There are a couple of them that we've been working with during the pandemic. There are a couple of them that we worked with in other areas.
But we do have some new vendors coming on.
We got 2 vendors on here that we've never worked with.
Great, thank you.
Chair Scott?
Yes, a couple questions. For instance, I know, of course, the person that's actually doing the work will be locally located. Are they also corporately located? Locally, corporately located?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer for every single vendor, but I do know that we have, during our evaluation period, we have actually made visits to speak with most of these vendors, either on site at their corporate offices or on site at other areas or other properties that they may be working with. But I'm stopping just short of saying that I know for a fact that each one of them has an office locally, because I don't know that for certain, but I can find out.
Thank you. The other question would be, will specific companies be assigned to specific locations? So you will know, for instance, A Action Janitorial may always be at 5 Points, or Disinfectant Solutions will always be at Kensington, so you will know if there's any infractions, where they are?
Absolutely, man. I love that question. So on one of the previous slides, there's a image up, I can't remember which slide number that is. It may be back on slide 5. It kind of have a graphic that kind of shows, but you're exactly right. One more, please. Another one. There we go. So on that, the chart to the top right, it basically kind of shows, it doesn't have the vendor name in each zone, but essentially, to your point, there will be a vendor assigned to each zone to include the zones 1 through 6, and the special event zone will have a vendor assigned, and we'll have two of the vendors that will be assigned for emergency type on-call response. So if we have another, our next ribbon cutting event, or in support of any other type special events or what have you, we'll always have some bandwidth to respond quickly, and we'll also have the primary folks assigned to a specific zone for accountability to make sure that they're delivering as we expect them to.
So zone would be not more than one location, but that particular location.
Well, so in the map to the left, zones 1 through 5 are more than one station. Zone 6, because of the sheer size of it, is just one location. So
I got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other questions from the committee?
And Chair
Mr.
Scott,
Hunt?
if you go to your agenda report, it does detail it out. He just didn't include it in the presentation.
Okay.
First page of the agenda report, if you want to know which specific entity with which specific zone.
Thanks, Mr. Hunt. Mr. Frierson?
Yeah, just have one question, a couple questions. So I'm looking at your bullet points. So is the industrial cleaning and pressure washing the biggest piece of what they'll be doing is contractors?
Yes.
Okay, because that is critical, because that is really impactful. Because I can go into stations and I can see where it's been cleaned, and it just makes it look so much brighter and inviting.
Yes, sir. Yes,
So good. And so I know some work is already done, and they are doing a great job, all right? And then my friend Pond mentioned that having someone else look at the work that's done, maybe the Rider Advisory Council might be able to help putting some second eyes on it, because they use the services all the time. And once again, it really is subjective what is clean. And then also, you know, when you walk behind places where people don't see, that's when you really can tell whether they've done a thorough job. So we might want to incorporate someone else to help us in just that observation piece, all right?
Yes, sir.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Mr. Frierson, if I can just add to that, and Sean, I appreciate the response that you gave earlier, and I'll just add to the idea of eyes on is, yes, we have a station management program where people are specifically assigned to do that and go behind the doors, as you say, and eyes on also includes CIDs. You know, we've been in touch with local CIDs, and they've taken on the responsibility of being another set of eyes from the customer perspective, and they have a direct line to call in to see if they see anything. And then Sean was talking about the executive management team have each adopted a station. So every one of these stations has an executive sponsor whose responsibility it is once a week at least to go through as another set of eyes looking for. So the station management team has an objective document that says this floor must look like this, pictures and all of that, but then that's objective, but subjectively we have layers of folks coming through. Even the station's management team on a monthly basis switches. So, you know, the supervisor in one particular zone, it starts to look like wallpaper to you. Maybe you don't see it. You switch to another zone and it stands out. So we're trying all we can to have a matrix of different observations to your point.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Any other questions, comments? All right, I'll entertain a motion for agenda item number 4. It's been moved and seconded. Please vote. And that resolution passes. Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you.
All right, agenda item number 5 is an SMS briefing. Mr. Parham, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Chairman Worthy, Vice Chair Abdul Salam, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. McKinney, and members of the Operations and Safety Committee. I'm Dedrick Parham, Manager of Safety Management Systems in the Department of Safety and Quality Assurance. May I direct your attention to agenda item number 5, a briefing on the safety management system progress. Next slide. SMS is required by the FTA. The governing pillars of SMS are safety management policy, safety risk management, safety assurance, and safety promotion. These pillars are what our agency's safety plan are written from. Next slide. My briefing today will cover our SMS activities to date, closure of 2019 triannual audit caps, inclusion of our SMS in our safety plans, the bipartisan infrastructure law, e-course training, rules compliance program, implementation of committees attended by employees and leadership from multiple departments. Next slide. In 2019, GDOT conducted a triennial audit of MARTA's compliance with its mandated program standard. The audit resulted in 97 caps, of which 6 remain open to date. 5 of the 6 are submitted and under GDOT review, and we are projecting closure dates for the remaining open items as June 30th, 2022. Chairman Scott, we are closing these caps. The date in the presentation has changed for the next rail safety audit. The triennial audit is tentatively scheduled to occur in September of 2022. Next slide. The updated MARTA agency safety plan is currently under state safety oversight review. And as in previous years, once accepted, the board chair's signature is required, along with the general manager and our chief safety officer. The bipartisan infrastructure law has new requirements that must be incorporated in the next iteration of the agency safety plan. the 2023 update. Next slide. The bipartisan infrastructure law ensures the agency safety plan includes 4 requirements. These requirements, item 1, is where we identify mitigations or strategies related to exposure to infectious diseases through our safety risk management process. An example of this is our response to COVID. Item 2, Marta has a joint health and safety committee that meets this requirement. This committee consists of an equal number of employee representatives, the ATU, and Marta management. This committee is also required to approve updates to the agency safety plan before signature from our CSO, GM, and board chair. The signatures, however, are not required from the committee members on the document. Item 3, we continue to mature our risk reduction program for transit operations. We do have an initiative that meets this requirement. The operator shields are part of that, that are currently being utilized on the buses are part of that initiative. And item 4, we have identified an FTA training resource that answers this requirement. We also have identified internal instruction that supports de-escalation training for our employees. Next slide. To date, Marta has the following e-course training for employees: the SMS awareness, safety first hazard reporting, and the agency safety plan. The next course to be offered would be HIRA training, hazard identification and risk assessment. New employees are required to complete these trainings once they complete orientation. Our new employees can use this QR code to access their individualized Marta Learn platform. Once the code is scanned, the Marta sign-in page appears. Employees can sign in with their Marta email and password, then access their Marta Learn account. Next slide. The Rules Compliance Program is a committee of employees assembled to monitor and measure the understanding of safety rules and safe operations during service. The committee consists of employees from the Office of Safety, bus operations, rail operations, and the Office of Technical Training. The initial areas of observation include vehicle speed, railroad crossing, signal adherence, door closing, and cab distractions. Our goal is to reduce accidents and incidents in the system. For example, with door closings. We want to monitor how the doors are open during revenue service, and we also want to ensure all doors are open while passengers are alighting and closed prior to the trains departing the stations. These are initial observations. As the program becomes more robust, more rules will be added to this program. Next slide. Marta also has committee meetings that are held on a periodic basis from monthly to quarterly. These meetings are attended by employees and leadership from multiple departments along with ATU leadership. The responsibilities of these committees run the full range of the SMS pillars. The SMS Implementation Committee discusses and supports new SMS initiatives. The Safety and Security Certification Committee ensures the certification needs of Marta projects are met. Safety Risk Review Committee reviews risk assessments of identified hazards and mitigations. The Rules Compliance Committee, as we spoke about, will ensure employees understand safety rule and safe operations during service. The Joint Health and Safety Committee, which is the committee that meets the bipartisan infrastructure law requirement, reviews safety risks and reports of hazards and injuries. We also have the GM ATU Safety Committee, which is also made up of Marta and ATU leadership and addresses safety risks bound over from the Joint Health and Safety Committee and safety process issues. All these committees do promote a strong safety culture within Marta. Next slide, please. This concludes my briefing on the Marta SMS implementation. Thank you all. Have a good, safe, and productive day.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Parham. I think I wish Commissioner McMurray was here, but I speak for Chair Scott. We like hearing those caps being closed.
Yes.
That's music to our ears. Mr. Durrett?
Thanks for the presentation, Mr. Parham. Whenever I see the phrase, assaults on employees, I cringe a little bit. And I'm just curious, in this environment that we've been in for the past few years where we're seeing people assaulted instead of disagreements or arguments, I'm wondering if we have seen an increase in assaults on employees.
I don't have those numbers in front of me, but those assault numbers have been with MPD. And I can get those actual numbers to you, but from, just the notifications and such, I haven't seen an increase from year to year. But once again, we do have the training with the de-escalation training that was provided from MPD to the bus operations employees, and we're looking to piggyback off that and, put something together using learning and development for the entire authority.
Any other questions for Mr. Parham? Chair Scott?
Yes, Mr. Worthy, I agree with you about those caps. And Mr. Safety, I've nicknamed him Mr. Safety over there, so I'm going to nickname you Mr. Safety number 2, if that's okay. Mr. Durrett brought up a good question regarding increase of assault against, and I understand some drivers are subject to this, and this goes to the police department, right, Marta Police?
Yes, they're the first responders.
So have we had any incidents where we've had to ban riders based upon any assault on our drivers?
Well, we do have the Ride with Respect program, and I know there have been riders that have been banned. The exact number I don't know, but we have had employees that.
All right, Ms. Safety.
But we have had people get suspended.
Good morning. I am Deputy Chief Pearlie McKenzie. I'm standing in for Chief Prayer today. And we haven't noticed a significant increase in assaults. And we do have the Ride with Respect plan in which we issue suspensions. And sometimes those, along with those suspensions or citations, depending upon the behavior that's being exhibited. So we do have, actually have a plan that's in place right now where we have, done some things to increase our visibility both on the trains and in the stations to try to mitigate some of the things, some of the complaints that we've been receiving, as well as some of the things that our different MARTA staff have been seeing as well.
And I could imagine that it would be hard to implement because not every driver would know that a person has an infraction against another driver. And so is that sent via email or something to the drivers so that they're aware? How do you communicate that when it does happen?
Well, the suspensions, if you can imagine for each, there are a lot of suspensions, I'll say that. So that would be, to do that would be overwhelming. But we do keep the individual person, let's say if you're the victim of an assault, then you're apprised of it. The garages, we also try to keep them apprised of it. But again, there's so many suspensions out there, and to be honest with you, the plan is about trying to change behavior.
Right.
And so to us, if we don't have another incident involving that person, then hopefully we've effectively changed their behavior. But for those more aggressive assaults, aggravated assaults and things of that nature, then they receive permanent and or one-year bans, and those descriptive BOLOs go out to the garages as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Safety.
Ms. Abdul Salam?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Chief sat down too fast.
If you stand in for Crayer, we're going to keep you up here a little longer.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, seriously, though, there was incident last week that I was made aware of, and it's not the first time I've heard it, but it prompted a question in my mind. With our see something, say something, and how that works. I got a couple of calls last week about some guy on the train brandishing a big knife. And I tell them sometimes we may not have uniformed officers, but we do have undercovers on the trains sometimes. So what happens if somebody sees something like that and reports it, takes a picture, snaps it? Where did that go to?
Well, we now have implemented we call it CSA 2.0,
Okay.
where we are going to a new company or have moved into a new company. I believe April 8th may have been the start date for that company. And some of us have tested it out, and it's working pretty well. And as we find issues with it, they're quick to correct it. But it goes directly, once you utilize that app, it goes directly into our police communication center.
Okay.
There are call takers there, and if there are any questions that need to be asked before that information is given, to an officer to dispatch. So it's, since we first implemented this, I believe back in 2013, it's been a great addition for us. Everybody across the country is touting, see something, say something, and that app allows that to happen.
Right.
We're also able to, if they're a victim of something, the call taker is going to ask the right questions to be able to make contact back with them. And so it's a very good program, and we hope to see it continue. Again, we need all the eyes and ears that we can have.
When you have an incident or occurrences like that, there are cameras on the various trains and what have you. Would that something you would go back and try to get the feedback and maybe suspend that person for a time?
Oh,
if
yes,
you can
ma'am.
identify them?
And again, we're actually will be coming back to the board with some, I won't say updated behaviors, but just some changes we want to make to the ride with respect suspension that, we've been seeing just in these last 2 years since COVID, that we want to kind of beef up what the suspensions are for some of those behaviors.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Ms. Hordage?
I'm sorry.
It just, thank you, Chief McKinsey. Just to add for Ms. Abdul Salam, a couple things that I'll give credit to MPD here is, yes, when that call comes in, they also dispatch, MPD resources who may be well close to the location, so they get there right away. But on the BOLO, the be on the lookout, something that Deputy Chief McKinsey didn't boast about is the fact that on a regular basis, we get updates of the MPD folks who, without the person having done something else, them just recognizing that face from a BOLO. So they must be reviewing those on a regular basis, patrolling the system, and if they see someone on the system that they know shouldn't be there, they take action on that.
Any other questions for Mr. Parham? Thank you very much for that informative briefing, Mr. Parham. I'll direct committee members to your board packet, which has FY22 March performance indicators for your perusal. That is informational only, no action item, and with nothing else on our agenda, I will adjourn the Operations and Safety Committee.
We'll start. All right, the first item on the agenda is approval of the April 28th, 2022 Business Management Committee meeting minutes. Okay, I got a second. All right, can I get a vote? Okay, the meeting minutes have been approved. All right. The next item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing the solicitation of proposals for the procurement of transit bus, shelters, and advertising. RFP P50145, Kevin Hackshaw, Manager of Business Development Sales. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Farson, Mr. Durrett, members of the Business Management Committee, Mr. Greenwood, and Mr. Srinath. My name is Kevin Hackshaw. I am the Manager of Business Development and Sales in the Marketing Department. May I direct your attention to agenda item number 2, resolution authorizing the solicitation of proposals for the procurement of transit bus shelters and advertising, RFP P50145. Next slide, please. So we'll start with our existing inventory and the current contract details. Our existing inventory consists of 8,849 bus stops, 1,075 bus shelters, of which 50 are digital advertising shelters and 340 are static advertising shelters. Now, these are managed by our ad partner currently, that is Outfront Media, and that current contract, which is P5431, was executed on December 31st, 2007, and expires on December 31st, 2022. It includes advertising sales on bus shelters and bus benches. The contractor is also responsible for maintenance, repair, litter pickup, and cleaning of said amenities. Marta has the option to use up to 10% of the ad space free of charge. And finally, the minimum annual guarantee, or MAG, of $35.5 million over the contract period includes also a $1 million lump sum payment. Next slide, please. All right, that takes us to the proposed RFP details. Now, the priority for this RFP is excellent customer service and experience inside the shelters. It's for a 15-year agreement. We are going to double the digital ad shelters from 50 to 100 shelters. And after the proponent does the 100th shelter, they can, at their, if they want to, they can do more than 100 shelters, but we are going to hold them to double that 50 to 100. The proponent will also be responsible for installation of 20 shelters and 20 benches per year, and these will be non-revenue generating amenities. Again, there's no cap on how many revenue generating amenities the proponent may install. The proponent will also be responsible, just as in the older contract, for the maintenance, repair, litter pickup, and cleaning of new and existing amenities. The proponent will also include or implement a new trouble ticketing system, as well as implement a 7-day maintenance schedule for continuity of services. And we estimate a MAG of $43 million over the 15-year contract period. Also, to note, the MAG revenue is independent of any costs incurred by the proponent for installation of the new amenities or maintenance of new and existing amenities. Next slide, please. So next steps. We need board authorization for solicitation of the RFP, estimated June 9th, 2022. We plan to issue the RFP estimated by July 1. Contractor selected and award the contract estimated November 2022, as well as issue a notice to proceed estimated January 1st, 2023. Next slide, please. And that concludes my presentation. The floor is open for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hackshaw. Can I get a motion? And second. Okay, it's been moved in second. Mr. Pond, you have a question?
We've had these discussions before when we put out a bid proposal. Maybe this is a Raj question, but 15 years, conditions change. Your pricing will come in different based on economic conditions this year versus 2 years from now. I'm just questioning, is 15 years the right number to have this contract out there? That's a pretty long time for someone to bet the farm on, because if they don't price it correctly, they're left hanging for 15 years. So, or vice versa, overpricing it. I'm just a thought, really. Is 15 years the right number?
So if I can just say, so typically what we do for the 15-year contract, or the reason it's 15 years, is because unlike the transit advertising contract, the primary purpose of this contract is for them to maintain shelters for customer experience, as well as build new amenities. And so with that being the case, also as well, the bus advertising, the transit shelter advertising revenue is not as high as bus and rail. So what happens is we want to give whatever proponent decides to bid on this the opportunity to recover some of that revenue, because it is an ongoing, every year they have to build 20 shelters, every year they need to put in 20 bus benches. So we want to give them the opportunity to make that money back, which is why it's such a long period.
I understand that, and the only follow-up question is, for these past contracts like this, have we had performance criteria where people have quit performing and gone out of business? I know your contract has these safeguards in it, but what has been the history of this contract in the past?
So with this particular contract, typically the companies that bid on this are on the larger side, and so we haven't had that issue to date.
Mr. Dewar, have a question?
Yeah, when I saw 8,849 bus stops and 1,075 shelters, it just occurred to me that, and maybe this is a suggestion, and if it exists already and I'm not aware of it, shame on me, but with the emphasis on safe routes to transit and improving conditions so that riders of buses are dignified, I'm wondering if we have built up a database that shows these almost 10,000 places where you get the opportunity to get on a bus or disembark. Have we graded them in terms of condition or the environment around them so that we can set some goals for how we're going to advance on that, so that we're aiming for 10,000 A+ experiences?
Yes, thank you for the question. And yes, I'm not sure if we've completed this, but we're using our GIS database to make sure that we assess each of our locations for exactly that. First of all, where do we need a shelter? Where do we need amenities? Where is the route to transit most treacherous? Is it a high ridership location? So I don't know all the criteria, but those are the criteria that we're using to assess those.
And I guess an additional point is, I think it would be great for the board every once in a while, whether it's quarterly or every year, let's see how we're making progress in that regards. As we need to be emphasizing bus in the future, that's a really important element. So having us agree on metrics that we're striving for and then seeing how we're accomplishing that would be a great tool for me.
We may be able to bring forward our 1,000 amenities program and in a future briefing, and kind of walk through the process with that.
Mr. Mullis.
Yes. Do you have a minimum budget that the winning vendor would have to put in for each shelter?
No, we do not. When you say a winning budget for each shelter.
Yeah. Do they have a budget for the shelter? Do you have design standards for the shelter? Do you have anything that would inform the proponents what you would like to see in the shelter?
So actually, they will have to conform to the shelters that are currently being built. The name of the company that actually prefabs the shelters escapes me right now, but whoever's the winning proponent will have to conform to those.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry. Are there any other questions? Hearing none, I call the question for the proposal. the resolution has passed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hackshaw. The next item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing a modification in a contractual authorization for desktop equipment and deployment services, RFP P3567A. Mr. Kirk Talbert, AGM, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman Frierson, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Srinath, and members of the Business Management Committee. This morning, I'm coming before you asking for approval of extending an existing contract that we have with Dell that provides PCs, laptops, and other computers for the agency. Our current contract will expire on December 18th of this year. We're asking for a one-year extension with 2 one-year options. The general purpose of this is to allow us to continue to purchase Dell equipment that is consistent with the standard equipment that we've been purchasing and replacing for the past few years. This contract began in 2018. And the need to extend it is driven largely by the need to replace older equipment that can no longer run supported operating systems, but also, as we've discussed earlier today, supply chain issues that have delayed the ability to procure equipment and hardware. So if approved, this request will, if you'll slide up one slide, please. This request would add authorization to spend $2.8 million more over that 3-year period, so the 1-year extension with 2 one-year options, and that funding would come out of our approved capital budget for IT technology.
Thank you. May I get a motion in a second? Okay, it's been moved in second. Questions from the board? Comments? None? Okay, I'll call the question. All right, the resolution has passed. Thank you, Mr. Talbert. You got the next item on the agenda. This is item 4, is a resolution authorizing modification in a contractual authorization for the renewal of maintenance support for the Cisco Smart Net devices, IFB B47511. Mr. Talbert, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a request to extend a 1-year contract that was let last year. The contract will expire on July 15th of this year, and it was competitively bid and awarded to NetSync Network Solutions. This contract provides maintenance and support coverage for all of the network equipment, the routing equipment that interconnects rail stations, facilities, headquarters, whatnot. The original contract amount was for $436,602.72. The request is to extend this contract for 1 year, add an additional $531,382.47 out of our approved operating budget for the year. And at the end of this contract, we would then go out and competitively bid support services for the Cisco equipment.
All right, I'll call the question. I need a motion in a second. Okay, it's been moved in second. All right, questions from the board members? Hearing no questions, then I call the question. Okay, the resolution has passed. All right, thank you, Mr. Talbert. The next item on item 5 on the agenda is a resolution authorizing an award of a contract for the procurement of employee voluntary benefit program, RFP P48735. Calvin Wright, Interim AGM, Human Resources. You have the floor.
Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning, Chair Frierson, Vice Chair Durrett, and members of the Business Management Committee, Mr. Greenwood and Mr. Srinath. I'm here to ask, next slide, please. The HR department is seeking board approval on a resolution authorizing the interim general manager, CEO, or his delegate to enter into three contracts for procurement of employee voluntary benefits, which RFP P48735, and the contract to be entered into is with Legal Shield, MetLife, and Purchasing Power. Next slide, please. The voluntary benefits program is offered to full-time and part-time employees only. This program includes legal services, pet insurance, and the purchasing of selected products and services. There's no financial impact to Marta. The payments to the vendors are done through via automatic payroll deduction. Customer services management is done strictly by the vendors. Next slide, please. As you can see, procurement consideration was a very competitive process. It was issued, RFP issued on October 20, 2021. The notice to proponents, and there was 51 vendors, 80 firms retrieved the actual online solicitation, and the proposal deadline was outlined as of January 20th, 2022. The actual was 10 proposals received, and only 9 was considered to be responsive. To the right on the slide, you will see the advertising dates and locations. Next slide, please. And the selected service providers are Purchasing Power, and you can see the services that they provide. Legal Shield is, of course, for prepaid legal services, and MetLife is for pet insurance. Next slide, please. And we're proposing these contracts to be with a 3-year base and with 2 one-year options. And you can see to the right of it, we have a significant number of our employees utilizing these particular benefits. All right, next slide, please. And we respectfully request the board approval of a resolution authorizing the interim general manager and CEO or his delegate to enter into contracts for procurement of employee voluntary benefits, RFP P48735, and the vendors are Legal Shield, MetLife, and Purchasing Power. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wright. Can I go ahead and get a motion in a second? Okay, it's been moved and second. Any questions from the board members?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Madam Chair?
Hi, good morning, thank you. Just one quick question, because we see already the voluntary benefits employee participants. So how long has this been available prior to now?
It was a pilot run for about 6 years.
6 years,
Yes.
the pilot? So we're just continuing with the same companies offering the same services?
Not the same companies, no.
Not the same, okay.
No, it went out for bid. And we had quite a few individuals that to bid. Some of the existing companies bid also. And the only one that, that's actually 2 that secured the bid, was Purchasing Power. They've been very consistent in what they've been doing, and our employee base is giving them one of the highest ratings I've seen in utilization. And MetLife, they offered other benefits earlier, and they decided not to submit a bid for those, and the only thing they submitted a bid for was pet insurance.
So basically, it will be new companies offering the same services, but the bids were awarded to the other companies, correct?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions? I just want to add that this, I'm glad to see this is a great extended services that are available for our employees. Once again, they clearly are utilizing the services, and so it's a great opportunity for them to have some extended benefits. So hearing no other questions, then I'd like to call the question. Okay, the resolution has been passed. Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. The next item on the agenda, item 6, is a resolution authorizing a modification in a contractual authorization for the master agreement services. LOA L50057. Loubrero, Chief Administrative Officer. You have the floor.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Loubrero. I'm the Chief of Administration, and I'm here to ask for a resolution authorizing the modification on a contractual authorization for the services with Talent Connection LLC. This is a service provider of leadership services for Marta.
The origin of this agreement is due to the fact that we had a transition on our HR department, and we were in need of leadership support while we advance the search for a new AGM of HR. So we are requesting additional funds to the originally executed contract on October 21, 2021 for a total of $96,000. This additional funding in the amount of $82,500, we added an original funding to the original funding, $82,500 in February 2022 to secure the continuation of these services. However, we are asking at this time an extension of an additional 4 months, an additional funding of $50,000 to support the payment of this service through the end of the contract term. This contract is being funded 100% out of the operating budget of the Department of HR, and will facilitate the continuation of leadership transitional services for the Department of HR as we conduct interviews and hopefully are able to select a new AGM for that department, and will enable us to be able to create an appropriate handoff in the process and ensure leadership continuity.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much. Can I get a motion in a second? Okay, it has been moved in second. Question? Mr. Pond.
Clarify me, is this basically a contract employee or?
Yes, yes it is.
Okay. Mr. Mullins.
I'm very supportive of this to get through this. This is, I guess, a critical function because of all of the open positions that we have, and the new AGM is going to be an important leader to help us solve that problem. Do we have a timeline for when?
So we are now scheduled to conduct interviews, and hopefully we'll be able to, if a candidate, a successful candidate is selected, we'll be able to bring that over to you over the next couple of months for authorization and approval. And so a period of 3 to 4 months is what we are anticipating to be the transition.
Any other questions from the board members? Okay. Hearing none, I'd like to call a question concerning the resolution. All right, the resolution has passed. Thank you, Mrs. Barrero. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item 7 on the agenda is a resolution to approve the operating and capital budgets for FY 2023. Maggie Schilling, Senior Director of Budget and Grants. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Mr. Frierson, Mr. Durrett, Mr. Srinath, my boss, and Mr. Greenwood. I'm here to give an overview and present a resolution to approve the FY23 operating and capital budget for about $1.3 billion combined. These numbers will all look familiar. These are the same that you saw at the briefing on May 13th. We can go forward one slide, please. So here's a quick overview of the timeline so far. So as I mentioned in the board briefing on May 13th, the numbers that you'll see in this presentation are exactly the same as you saw in that presentation. We've since had 2 public hearings. I'll give you an overview of the feedback that we received from those public hearings at the end of this presentation. But we had one on May 16th, that was here at headquarters, and then one on the 17th, that was at the DeKalb Library, the Decatur branch.
We have also done briefings for all of the jurisdictions between May 17th and May 25th. So I believe we just finished them up yesterday with the City of Atlanta. And then moving forward, today we will have this committee presentation and then final adoption on June the 9th at the board meeting then. Next slide, please. All right, next slide. So the FY23 budget, one of the main premises is that this would return to pre-pandemic service levels for all fixed route services. So for bus, rail, and streetcar, you'll see on the right-hand side is what we're proposing for FY23, roughly the same as what we saw in FY29, which was pre-pandemic. For mobility, we are anticipating an increase in FY23 as ridership returns, but not a full recovery to pre-pandemic. Next slide. So for the FY23 budget, as we discussed before, we are anticipating a surplus of about $65.1 million. This is the far right here. This is in keeping with what we've seen in previous years and is largely driven by a continuation of the American Rescue Plan funds, which are the COVID relief funds that we expect to exhaust in the FY23 budget year. Next slide. So here's an overview. The FY23 budget assumes $652.7 million in revenue. The bulk of these coming from our sales tax and ad valorem, which account for about 54% of the total revenue combined. The American Rescue Plans are that ARP funds, that's the yellow chunk there, that's the $140.4 million. This is a one-time revenue source, as I mentioned, that we will exhaust in FY23. We also are anticipating $73.5 million in additional formula funds, and this is essentially 5307 funds supporting preventative maintenance activities. Passenger revenues at $67 million. This is roughly a 10% increase over FY22. Next slide, please. So here's a breakdown of the expenses. $587.6 million in expenses are anticipated for FY23. The bulk of this is really labor, overtime. It's about 65% of our total budget, with some slight increases in fuel, driven by really the increase in fuel costs that we're seeing everywhere. And this actually will feature in the next item that I will present for the current FY22 Q3 update. Next slide, please. So now I'll talk a bit about the capital budget. Next one, please. So the capital budget anticipates $717 million in expenses combined. This includes $145 million in debt service, a state of good repair budget of about $512 million, and then a Marta City of Atlanta expenses of $45.4 million, and Marta Clayton County $14.5 million. This will be supported in its totality with just over $1 billion in available funds. So 599.5 of which are carryover from previous years, and 471 will come from generated funds in FY23. At the end of FY23, we expect to carry over about $353.5 million for use in future budgets. Next slide, please. So this is going to be a look at our state of good repair budget. This does not include the Marta City of Atlanta or the Marta Clayton County. Some additional details were provided on the 13th. Just looking at state of good repair, this is a sources of $671.8 million. Again, the bulk of this, almost in equal parts, coming from current year sales tax and carryover of previous year sales tax or surplus. We are also anticipating about $84.5 million in federal grants, largely formula, some competitive, some discretionary. And you'll notice there that little green slice is the other piece of the COVID relief funds. These are the CRISA funds. We have about $17 million programmed for FY23, and there will be about an additional $16 million in FY24. We expect to expend all of the CRISA funds on the capital side in FY24. Next slide, please. So this is a look at the expenditures planned for the state of good repair budget in FY23, $657 million. These are broken down into the 5 asset categories that are required by FTA.
Our largest category in FY23 is going to be facilities and stations. This is largely driven, about half of that is coming just from the station renewal program. Next slide, please. So here are our top 10 FY23 capital projects. These 10 projects alone are just under 60% of our total FY23 anticipated spend on the capital side. You'll see at the top there that rail station rehabilitation that I just mentioned is our biggest single program in FY23. Next slide. Okay, I'm now going to go through the public hearings. If you can go forward. As I mentioned, we had 2 public hearings, one on the 16th, one on the 17th. The one on the 16th that was held here in headquarters was also streamed on YouTube and Facebook. So we had 17 attendees live, and as of the time of this slide, which was just Monday of this week, we had 174 views. I was on there last night. It was a little over 200, so additional views coming in. We had 2 in-person attendees, 1 at each of the sessions. If we jump forward, this next slide gives you an overview of the comments received. Next one, please. So as I mentioned, we had 2 attendees. On the 16th, we had an attendee. You'll see a summary of the full comment there, but just to give you kind of a few big pieces, I think the primary concern from the budget side was really around presentation of how we are dealing with the reserve. So saying, you know, right now, the unified reserve is all available reserve funds that could be used for either operating or capital. And so this attendee was requesting specifically that we would show those 2 reserves separately. And there was also a question about putting a moratorium on sub-consultants in FY23. The speaker at Decatur, this was less related to the budget, but was more about service. And so this was also addressed by the board members that were attending there at the time. But he had a concern about placement of bus stop. And so this, as I mentioned, the board members in attendance helped address this. This also will be passed along to our internal group, our planning group and operations. All right, next one, please. So that concludes my presentation. And at this time, I respectfully request that the board approve the resolution to authorize the FY23 operating and capital budgets. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, can I first get a motion and a second? There it is. Okay, it's been properly moved and second. All right, question from the board members. Any comments? Mr. Mullins.
Great job.
Thanks.
We've been having a lot of success with our budgeting month over month with surpluses. I looked at a slide, I think in your presentation for 2022 fiscal year.
Yes.
I don't see the surplus on that slide. Am I looking at the wrong thing? Is this the wrong budget? Is this operating budget or?
Yes, so the first slide of that next presentation, I don't know if you want to jump, we can just jump right in. If you want to go to the next presentation, it would be slide number 2.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Perhaps, I mean, were you referencing a slide in the budget presentation or the next?
The budget presentation.
That's
Oh, okay. I'm
Back.
assuming you're talking about there were
yes.
4 bar charts there?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
Maggie, if you could go to
Take it
that.
back. Sorry.
Yeah.
So that would be roughly,
Slide 5.
yeah.
Yeah. Your question was about fiscal year '22?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was the budget. When we went into the fiscal year '22, we presented with the board with a balanced budget. That's what got approved. But as we end the year, as you can would see from Maggie's next presentation, to date, we are, I think, first 9 months ending, we have a surplus of about $128 million. And by the end of the year, we expect to be around $150 million.
So first of all, bravo once more. I feel like I say that every board meeting. From that perspective, we're going to sweep those funds into a capital account at the end of the year, is that correct?
In '23, refresh my, about 245 million of those surplus funds would be used to fund the capital budget.
Correct. So they would go into a unified reserve fund. In FY23, we have assumed about 245 million in reserve, so carryover reserve, so that exact surplus is going to fund the capital budget.
So we're projecting, we're at 128 now, we're projecting 150 by July 1. And where does the balance of that money come from?
Existing.
From the
yeah.
previous years, as you can see from the bar chart, that even 20 and 21, we have seen surpluses, so all of that would be used.
Okay, all right. It's time to start spending some money.
All right, Mr. Pond?
Just a comment, having seen the budget process for the last 4+ years, I would just like for colleague Raj and Meg and your team to say that's by far the best process we've gone through. We spent 2 hours May 13th, and I think budget oversight is one of the most important functions of this board, and so many times it kind of comes up quickly and there's not a lot of time to review it, discuss it. So I thought the process this year, devoting May 13th, several hours going through this in detail, was a great way to do it, and you need to, I think, have that kind of oversight and time in the future. So just a comment.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pond. Chairperson Scott?
Yes, sorry. My question is around, as you mentioned, we've had the jurisdictional briefings since the May 13th, us being covered on the '23 budget.
Yes.
And from the jurisdictional briefings, each one, there have been many, many questions about criteria for capital projects.
Yeah.
So did we revisit any of the criterias or the list of capital projects and realign them with any of the questions that we received from the jurisdictions?
Okay. So I will say this, and I don't know if the capital group wants to weigh in on this as well, but the FY23 budget has not changed from when you originally saw it. The same projects have been included. I think the questions that have come to me, and I wasn't at each of those jurisdictional meetings, is that there was a question about getting some additional insight on how the criteria was developed and what criteria we used. And so I know that that information is forthcoming from Kerry and Manjeet's group. But from the budget side, we didn't do any reprogramming in response to questions for additional information.
So my question is, will we? Because there were major questions around capital projects, criteria, and revisiting what the jurisdictions feel should be a capital project for their various jurisdictions.
So just to follow on what Maggie has said, the jurisdictional briefings ended yesterday. There simply hasn't been time to recast the budget based on those comments, but Maggie's quite right. The majority of the comments were seeking clarification on the budget, not challenging the content of the budget itself. If during our deliberations there's a need to reestablish or revisit, the priorities, we'll certainly do that. But I don't believe that's necessary for the budget itself. It's more a transmission of information that the jurisdictional partners were looking for.
Right, and I guess my question is not around the budget itself, but what the jurisdictions feel is what should be first, second, third, their concern about what is a capital project, what should be the first in their jurisdiction, especially listening to the Atlanta yesterday and their questions around why this, why that, and also wanting clarifying information. So I just want to make sure that we are looking at their concerns, and that the next jurisdictional briefing, we can answer those concerns, and that the documents they ask for, they will receive.
Yeah, those documents are already in production or have been produced and, will be transmitted to them shortly. And yes, of course, we'll definitely look at the comments and see what needs to be changed, but any changes will be inside, well within the budget as presented.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments from the board? Okay, any other questions? Okay, hearing none, I'd like to call a question concerning the resolution concerning the budget, operating and capital budget for 2023. Call the question. Okay, the resolution has passed. Thank you, Ms. Schilling. Appreciate it very much. Once again, this is a big step for us as a transportation organization, and once again, we're looking forward to fulfilling these budget obligations. All right, the next item on here is a briefing for FY 2022 March financial highlights and financial performance indicators. Maggie Schilling, you have the briefing. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much. We can go to the next slide, please. So this is a briefing of the financials through the third quarter of FY22. And here's a look at our year-to-date. As you see, as has been the story throughout this fiscal year, we are still running a considerable surplus, both on the revenue and expense side. So positive revenues and underspending on the expense side. Right now, we have a surplus of about $128.3 million. We can go to the next slide, please. And this is where you'll see where a lot of that surplus is coming from. So on the revenue side, we are running a year-to-date variance of $87.9 million to the positive. Really, almost all revenue sources are performing better than expected. Sales tax being one of the largest. We also have additional COVID relief funds. This is those ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan. The only area where we are underperforming is in station parking. It is not recovered the way that we anticipated in FY23, but this is a very small amount of money. On the expense side, again, considerable underspend, largely driven by high vacancy rate. We had about 682 vacant positions as of March, but all other areas also lower than anticipated expenses. Next slide, please. So now we'll jump into the month to date. So this is just for the month of March. You'll see a slightly different story here. This is probably one of the first months this year that we have seen that expenses exceed the budgeted amount. This is entirely driven by cost of living and one-time bonus payments to represented employees in the month of March. These were all paid out in the month of March and were retroactive to January, and so you see one big hit in March for those additional costs. But during the month of March, still maintaining considerable positive revenue, $9 million above budget. Next slide, please. Again, this is looking at the detail. Really the same story in March that we've seen all year on the revenue side. But as I mentioned, on the expense side, because of those one-time cost of living adjustments and bonus payments to represented employees, you're going to see some negative labor numbers there because we paid everything out in 1 month, paid them back retroactive. So in previous months, I don't anticipate this will be the case. I mentioned in my previous presentation, you're also starting to see in the materials and supplies line the impact of rising fuel costs. So for one of the first months all year, we are also seeing an overspend in materials and supplies. This is almost entirely due to compressed natural gas and unleaded fuel. Our diesel hedge did buffer some of the increase that we saw on diesel, but overall, a large increase in all fuel types. Next slide, please. All right, next one, please. Guys, good news in March. Our passenger revenue is for the first time in the past couple of months exceeding our current budget. You see that slight dip in January and February that we believe was attributable to the resurgence of COVID over those 2 months. We did see a drop in ridership. If we go to the next slide, you'll see this in two parts. So this is bus ridership year to date. Bus ridership for really the past 5 months has been below, and for most of the year, below our forecasted levels. So bus ridership is not recovering quite the way we anticipated. But if you jump forward, rail is where, next slide, please. Rail is where you're seeing that big recovery. This is really what's driving our better than expected passenger revenues, is that rail ridership has performed much better than forecast throughout most of the year. Again, you see that dip in January and February when we had the resurgence of COVID, but in March, we're seeing it now jump above forecasted levels. Okay, next slide. From here, I'm going to turn it over to Kerry Roca to go ahead and walk you through the capital highlights.
Good morning again, Chair Frierson and members of the Business Management Committee. I'll run through some of the capital highlights. Several of these we've talked about a little bit this morning, but next slide, please. So in terms of the sources and uses, this is referring to the state of good repair, so it does not include the more Marta for Atlanta or Clayton. In terms of sources of funds, our actual sources of $237 million against $241 million, which would be the expectation at 9 months into the fiscal year. Under uses, and again, it's broken down by the asset categories, we have expended $165.5 million in our capital program against a budget of $360 million, again, 9 months out of the 12 for the fiscal year. And then debt service of $107.7 million to date. Next slide, please. And these are the top 10 projects that we discussed this morning in the Planning Committee presentation by expenditure. So you see the actual expenditures, again, sorted by the top expenditures for this point of the year. So $115.2 million against $243 million, which would have been anticipated at this point in the year. Next slide. And that concludes our presentation.
All right, thank you. We have any questions from the board members concerning the highlights? Mr. Rob Mullis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Friesen. Question around hedging. I have 2 questions around hedging, one on fuel and one on interest rates. I know we're looking at this for the month of March, but fuel is just going in one direction. What are our hedging strategies going into fiscal year 2023?
Thank you for that. For fiscal year 23, we have already hedges in place for about roughly 25% of our diesel consumption, and natural gas is approximately about 30% of our consumption. I mean, the prices are pretty high right now, so hedging anything more at this point may not be in our best interest, but we do have some hedges in place. And also our budget contemplates an increase. In other words, 2022, we had budgeted diesel at about $1.50 a gallon. And this year it's $3.40 a gallon. And Maggie, if I do misspeak, please correct me. And our natural gas budget last year, fiscal year 22 was $4.30 per decatherm. And going into 23, it's at $6.60 per decatherm.
So are we looking at hedging opportunities for fiscal year 2024 now, or do we?
Yes, actually we hedged for 24 months, so that would cover most of 24 as well.
So we have coverage.
We have 24-month hedge.
Yes, so we have coverage for 25% of diesel fuel, and we have coverage for 30% of natural gas for 24 months.
That's correct.
And the strike price is above where we are currently buying?
It's an average cost over the 24 months. So as I said, diesel, our budget is $3.40 per gallon. Our hedges are at $3.06 a gallon, so it's below budgeted price for diesel. Likewise for natural gas too, our budget is $6.60 per decatherm, and our hedge is at $6.32 per decatherm. So we have hedged for the 24 months below our 23 budget. and we'll make sure we'll visit the 24 budget when we get there.
And where's the current market now?
Natural gas is roughly around 8. I may be off a little bit because it keeps changing, $8 per decatherm. Sometime I saw it, but Bloomberg yesterday, it was around 8, so I do not know this morning.
And diesel?
Pretty much the same thing. Heating oil is roughly around $4 a gallon.
So we're underwater right now.
No, actually, we are in the money.
We're in the money.
We are in the money. Our hedges were way below that.
We're below
Yeah,
that.
we're in the
Okay.
money.
Okay, so, okay. And then on credit, do we have any hedges on credit?
Yeah, I mean, we do not have, I mean, I shouldn't say we do not. We have very little variable rate exposure, and that's fixed to what's called a SIFMA index.
SIFMA,
So
30-day, 90-day?
SIFMA is a weekly index.
So
SIFMA is a weekly index,
Okay,
correct.
okay.
That's a
A
tax
weekly,
exempt index,
okay.
it's a weekly index.
Okay.
It is fixed to that, so.
Okay, sounds like we're properly hedged then, for a percentage of our portfolio.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mullis. Any other questions from the board concerning the financial information? All right, thank you. Appreciate it very much for the presentation. Thank you for the information. Are there any other questions from the board member? Hearing none, then I call the Business Management Meeting Committee to be adjourned. Thank you, everyone.